Peace at any cost? The US says Ukraine is losing the war and should accept a deal. The EU argues that would be walking into a Russian trap. Shuttle diplomacy to end the conflict continues, but is Kyiv running out of leverage? I'm Melinda Nusafora, and you're watching Counterpoints. President Donald Trump likes strong leaders. He likes winners. So his latest comments about Ukraine's leader must have struck the fear of God in Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
You're going to have to get on the ball and start accepting things. You know, when you're losing, because you're losing.
Do you think Ukraine has lost this war?
Well, they've lost territory long before I got here.
He's losing. Losing territory, losing soldiers, and it seems losing US support. This puts President Zelenskyy in a very precarious position as peace negotiations drag on.
Things which are very important for today, I think unity between Europe and Ukraine, and also unity between Europe, Ukraine and the United States. There are some things which we can't manage without Americans, things which we can't manage without Europe, and that's why we need to make some important decisions.
The EU needs to make some important decisions too. Cracks are starting to show in the bloc's support primarily over defence spending and the use of frozen Russian assets to fund the war. Coming up on the show, we'll ask, is it time for Zelenskyy to accept defeat and make a deal? If war fatigue is taking its toll on European support, and if US-EU unity is at risk if they continue to pursue opposing outcomes. Joining the show is Bijan Kian, former US government official who has worked across various US administrations, including President Donald Trump's. Sergei Markov is back with us, director of the Institute of Political Studies and former public spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Tobias Elwood rounds out our panel, a former British Defence Minister and past head of the UK Parliament's Defence Select Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to Counterpoints and thanks for being with us. In a recent sit-down interview, US President Donald Trump was blunt and you could say brutal. He said Volodymyr Zelenskyy needs to start accepting things. He said he believes Ukraine is losing the war and that Russia is in a stronger negotiating position. The Trump administration has made no secret of the fact it's frustrated with the lack of progress and the endless talks, and it seems no longer interested in maintaining the status quo. Bijan, let's start with you. Is it time for President Zelenskyy to accept defeat and make a deal?
Well, Melinda, let me just say my understanding of President Trump's position. He speaks from a position that he wants to end this war. And I think the Europeans also want to end this war with a different view. And, it makes sense to end this war. 3.5 years, hundreds of thousands of people, it doesn't matter on which side, dead. So President Trump is determined to end this war and is using all the diplomatic power that he can exert to make this happen in an alignment with our European partners, very important. So where we are today, I believe, looking at this from a very, very, objective point of view, if there is such a point of view out there, is it possible? Everybody needs to drop the low-cost concessions. For example, Russia is acting just like a superpower acts, asking for everything, saying, I want everything. I want your military to be capped. I want no military equipment in any measure, tanks, nothing. And I want to keep all the territory and I want more. Well, that is something that's not going to work out. I'm sure that the United States and Russia have made some understandings on this, or President Trump would have said Russia would be okay with it. Ukraine wants to also keep everything, and they need to take a look at what's a low-cost item they can drop and move on. For example, just accept demilitarize, stay on DMZ, and then, instead of accepting concessions, just buy some time and accept the demilitarized zones as they are. Instead of saying, no, I want Crimea back, I want Donetsk back, I want Donbass back. It's 7,000 kilometers that has to be recognized. President Putin, I don't think, can go back and say, we went through all these casualties and we got nothing. So everybody has to drop the expectations to a low-cost level, make it possible to end the war. And as long as that's allowed, there is hope that the war would be ended.
Okay. Tobias, I'm going to ask you next because, Sergei, I know what your answer to that question is going to be, so I'm going to come to you at the end. Tobias, do you agree with Bijan? And do you think that accepting defeat would embolden President Putin?
Well, I agree that we want the war to end, but the question is on what terms? War is horrible. I'm a former soldier. It is violent. It's destructive. People die. But the idea that you then rush to a peace deal, assuming that everybody's then simply going to go home and accept that, that's the big question. Who's going to provide the guarantees for peace? America has already made it clear that it's not interested in providing European security. It's stepping back, not just from Ukraine, but from Europe as a whole. That's leaving the West, the rest of Europe to look at that. And what assurance do we get that Russia is not going to advance its geopolitical objectives beyond Ukraine? I'm sorry to say, but Russia cannot be trusted. Russia cannot be trusted that it won't simply use the pause to rearm, regroup, and do this all over again. And this is the fundamental difference between American and European thinking. Trump is very concerned about the war. He's made that clear. But when you dig deeper, he's actually more interested in securing a minerals deal with Russia, befriending Russia. That came out in the national security strategy, rather than looking at the prospects of peace for Europe, which means standing up for Ukraine's sovereignty. The idea that in today's day and age, we allow the bully to gain traction, to keep a fifth of another country that it's invaded, and then pretend everything's okay and we can all go home, really ignores how global instability is growing, how global order is crumbling. We want America to show leadership. Trump promised that. And Europe has been very, very patient with the American president in trying to secure a deal to get people around the table. But that 28-point plan, which I think you've referenced already, was just a copy of what Russia's asking list was, and it was never going to be acceptable. And what we see today, to conclude my thoughts here, is America has decided to step back. Europe's now got to step up because Russia is not going to change its advances, its interests in expanding its influence across Eastern Europe.
I just want to pick up on one thing before I turn this over to Sergei.
If I may just say something real quickly, Tobias, does Europe have the support of Europeans? Do you have the ability to continue $183 billion? How far is Europe willing to fuel the fire of war on the premise that we have to be fair to Ukraine? Well, President Trump reduced the 28 points to 20 points, removed all those things. What low-cost concessions can Europe here tactically, not strategically, make to reduce the suffering now instead of winning political warfare?
Yeah, you make a very powerful point. And right now, there is not the appetite to lean in. The question is, like 1938, whether we're going to have to do it anyway, whether we put this fire out in Ukraine before it spreads. Because I'm afraid today, Britain is being attacked constantly by Russia. We have Russian ships prodding our undersea cables. We have Russian naval vessels coming into our maritime space. We have cybersecurity attacks on a daily, weekly basis. We have disinformation campaigns. We've even had assassinations on our territory as well. That's happening today. And if Russia is able to claim any sort of victory, that will continue right across Europe. That's the bigger picture. I'm afraid America, and I understand the American people don't see, and therefore they want to back away from it. But we're left to pick up the mess. So you're right in saying right now, we're perhaps going to struggle, but we'll find out the hard way, because there will be something seismic, something bigger, an acute event, which will make us realize that, boy, we're going to have to upgrade our defense posture and stand up to Russia. Otherwise, Russia will not stop.
All right, well, let's bring Russia in then. Bijan, I'm just going to interrupt you there for a moment.
Europe could have done a lot to not escalate the war. We have to be mindful of that as well.
We're going to come, we're absolutely going to come to that point a little bit further in our discussion. We are going to come to that, to Europe and its role a little bit later, but I want to absolutely bring Sergei in here to get, well, Russia's right of reply. First of all, Sergei, is Russia untrustworthy, as Tobias said, and is Russia attacking Britain today, right now?
Of course, Russia not attacking Britain. It's military hysteria which used by British government just for domestic political purposes, not to allow to the British
Your ships are in
Trump,
territorial waters.
who is Farage Nigel, to come to power. We know that British Donald Trump, mostly popular British politician right now, popularity of current British government is almost zero. Previous British governments who also took part in this war against Russia and put Britain risk to the risk of nuclear war, it also was almost zero. So it's used for the domestic, I would say quite dirty political purposes. And the British position as well politician or European Union, very contradictory. It's very clear for everybody. Look, on one hand they're saying, oh, Russian army too weak and not able to crush Ukrainian army. On another hand, they say, look, Russian army is going to attack NATO great coalition. But it's as clear as contradiction. And also, another contradiction, Russian leaders many times told, please, Europeans, stay out of Ukrainian crisis. And on another hand, by saying this, you think that Vladimir Putin is sending Russian navies and troops and drones to British territory. What for? To provoke Great Britain to take part in Ukrainian war. I'm very sorry. Why? To support this clear lie, clear propagandistic lie with one goal, to continue to fight against Russia by life of poor Ukrainian people. It's about
Let me ask this question,
sir.
Does Russia want to end the war? Does Russia want to end the war? Does Russia want to end the war?
Russia want to end the war because for us, Ukrainians, they are Russians. Kyiv,
How long can Russia
open
continue
the
this
history
war?
textbook of the school, you will know that Kyiv was Russian capital during 3 centuries, and Ukraine was part of the Russia during more than 1,000 years. For us, it's civil war. For us, Ukraine is occupied part of the Russia, which by Western countries and so on. That's why we want to stop this war as soon as possible. And about security of Ukraine, of course, it's a very important issue, of course, but the answer is very simple. Ukraine, between 1991 and 2014, when Ukraine was democratic, independent country, not with neo-colonial current repressive Russophobic regime, Ukraine had zero security problems with Russia. So let's back Ukraine to democracy.
Okay.
Let's
The
back
world
Ukraine
is not
to
afraid of
humanity.
Ukraine
Let's back
attacking
Ukraine
Russia.
to the
Okay,
political
just a
system.
moment.
It was
Just a moment,
2014.
Sergei.
It
Sergei,
was
just hold that thought for a moment. I'm going to bring our other two guests in. First of all, we need to point out that Ukraine absolutely would argue that they are not Russia. They have a distinct language, they have their own culture, and they claim their right to sovereignty. So when
I'm very sorry.
Russia says it wants
I'm
to
very
end
sorry.
the war. So, but I'm going to bring Tobias back in
Trump
here.
denies
And
that
Tobias,
he was
what do you
capable of
make
Russia.
of that argument from Sergei that Europe can't have it both ways? Europe can't say that Russia isn't big enough, strong enough to win against Ukraine. Look at how well Ukraine's doing, and then turn around and say, oh, well, now Russia's going to threaten NATO and it's attacking the UK. Which one is it? Is it a successful military power, or is it a threat?
Well, firstly, we're moving from the operational, in other words, what's happening on the battleground and who might or might not win, to the bigger geopolitical question as to whether Russia is right to invade another country. And in the 21st century, where we are today, it's not right for another country to invade a sovereign state and think it can get away with it. Much as they might be the stronger one, we have to stand up to tyranny. We have to stand up to dictators that choose to do that. Or where does our world go? And Ukraine absolutely has every right to defend itself, and the rest of Europe has every right to therefore support Ukraine. Now, there is a bigger question about what NATO should be doing if Russia feels threatened by that. That's certainly for the agreement. That's for the details. That's for the long-term plan. But what we're seeing right now is what happens to the territory that actually belongs to Ukraine that Russia is now claiming. And the point I said at the very beginning is that if Russia gets away with this, where does it go next? What will it try and actually do, hoping to then get another peace deal, another chunk of Europe? And that's the concern of all European capitals at the moment, is where does this end? And the perhaps naivety of Washington in not appreciating that if we don't put this fire out, there's probably going to come another time where America looks to Europe for support in perhaps another war, another intervention, another challenge. And we're going to be massively distracted because of what's going on here. Because, of course, behind Russia sits North Korea with its troops coming in, sits Iran with its support, and, of course, China. This is the geopolitical splintering that we're seeing. And I'm really sorry, and I say this as someone who's born in the United States, I have an American passport, that I'm really sorry that America is taking a step back from its interests of the global stage in supporting the very global order it helped write after the Second World War.
Mm-hmm. Bijan, what do you make of that?
I'm very sorry. Are you really right? Sure that Donald Trump is naive politician, New York real estate businessman during many years, show business, who comes through the second time on the to the presidential position after he was crashed after first round. Do you really believe that he is naive? I'm sorry.
Bijan, what do you
Asking
think?
me that question.
Let me just respond.
Let's say for the American.
Sergey, by asking a question, Tobias, thank you. By responding to Sergey, let's, first of all, analysts don't have to agree. When leaders agree on things, things move forward. So it's okay for us to disagree. But do you think Russia is intent on ending the war? Is it in the best interest of Russia to end the war now? Or do you think Russia is intent on continuing the war? Do you agree with President Trump when he says, I think Russia will be okay with my now 20th? See, the purpose I was putting emphasis on this is that United States has already compromised from 28 to 20 points, removing, to Tobias's point, making sure that Ukraine's right. See, Russia is the aggressor. The world does not look at Ukraine as a threat. The world looks at Russia as a threat. And I think, Sergey, you and I can agree on that in a New York second. So what we need to do to understand the intention of Russia, is Russia intent on ending the war? Because if Russia is not intent on ending the war, this would go on forever. From the indications of demands on wanting everything and not compromising. For example, says no heavy weapons. Well, how about to drop that a little bit? Maybe just enough to be able to suffice the fear of Russia, because Russia is the aggressor. The world does not think Ukraine is the aggressor. The world is not worried about containing Ukraine. The world is concerned about containing Russia. So if we understand that, is Russia is Russia intent on ending the war? Is my question to you, Sergei, and to Tobias about the naivete of, obviously you have different views than President Trump does. That's respected. And Europe has some very valid points. What concerns me is I have skepticism on Europe's motivations. Now, Europe feels left out and wants to do something. Europe is feeling Trump is the culprit. If Trump is not there, Europe would have a stronger position. I think politics are changing, Tobias, and there is a lasting relationship across the Atlantic that is important to Washington, that is important to Europe, and it must be maintained. I would like to see a less politicized, most pragmatic, you're a former Minister of Defense for United Kingdom. I went to school there, so I have a lot of love for, the British. I'm a product of British education. So I want to see things come to an aligned position where politics is out of it. This is not about campaigns and elections. And my fear is Europe wants a better, more like Biden, like Obama, friendlier. We go along and get along. But that was not the position that served world peace. Look what happened. But look at Trump's report card. Azerbaijan, Armenia, I honestly didn't think that Azerbaijan and Armenia can come together under any circumstances ever. I'm from that neighborhood. I know. So let's be reasonable. Let's drop low-cost concessions and say, look, we could give this up, pause this, if we're not interested in the endless forever wars. That's what my position is. And where I anchor my thoughts is stop the fatalities, stop the carnage. This is not good. I've seen wars, and I'm sure you've all seen wars. Wars are not good. Wars are not good. They must be ended by diplomacy. Strong diplomacy requires concessions on low cost. Let's turn the talk to that and encourage everyone to come to an end. 3.5 years, hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded. It's enough.
You bring up Europe, so let me move on to that next section of our debate so we can keep things moving through on time here. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been on a bit of a European charm offensive at the moment. The UK, then to Belgium, most recently to Italy. He's certainly trying to shore up support, and it's a timely move, because there have been some fractures of late within the bloc. One of them, particularly being Belgium, doesn't want to sign on to a plan to use frozen Russian assets to fund the continued war effort. Tobias, are cracks starting to show in EU support for Kyiv?
It's an important question. And going back, linking it with the last sort of section of our discussion, we have looked to America for leadership, and Donald Trump set the bar high when he said he was going to end the war within 48 hours. And as the most powerful nation in the West, we do look to America's statecraft to help us resolve some of these challenges. Of course, we don't want wars, but that 28-point plan was capitulation. And it was also, and I say this, you look back at Kissinger, at Holbrooke, and these big players that have helped secure peace deals. This was amateur by any standards. And to exclude Europe from that deal has now meant today, quite rightly, that President Zelenskyy and other European leaders are having to look carefully as to what our fresh strategy is, which is out without America. And you point to a big question, because there's the lethality that we need to slide across the table. That needs to improve. And then there's the money. And those frozen assets that sit in Belgium need to be released so we can actually keep Ukraine in the fight. I suspect we're going to get to a better place, partly because of now the reality check of America stepping back. But we're not there yet, and that's no doubt why you raised the question.
So, Tobias, I have a question for you. Are you ready? Is Europe ready to take at least partial shared responsibility together with President Obama and President Biden in losing Crimea? Do you take any responsibility? Do you say to yourself, we could have, together with Washington, we could have stopped the escalation and not losing Crimea, which is a very, very big, prior to 2014, does Europe take any responsibility for that, Tobias?
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument to say, but you can go back further than that. You get an indication. We're talking about Ukraine. Look what happened in Georgia. Look what's happened, with Russia's approach to its relationship with Europe. The bottom line here is that Russia does not want a working economy that's embracing the EU standards, the European Union, on its borders, because then Putin would then have to suffer the indignity of explaining to his own people why Russia is such a basket case. Belarus does a great job of saying, look, that's what is what Russia is like. But Ukraine was poised to become successful, to go the way of Poland. And of course, because of various pressures, it's been denied the opportunity to do that. But you point back at important junctures where in the past we could have done a lot more. But hesitance, this Cold War statecraft of looking our adversaries in the eye, knowing how to push back without losing control of the escalatory ladder, we've lost that. We've completely lost that. And we do need to rekindle it, because otherwise, I'm afraid there will be war in Europe soon.
Let me bring in Sergei here, because I want to get the Russian perspective.
When you don't like his policies, but somewhere inside you like his policies.
Bijan, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. I want to bring in Sergei to get some response to this. How does it feel, Sergei, in Moscow, sitting back and watching two of the traditional allies, the US and the UK, maybe being at loggerheads with each other, seeing division in Europe, the Belgian Prime Minister not wanting to take the interest from the Russian frozen assets to use to fund Ukraine's war. Is Europe playing into your hands here?
Europe, big coalition of almost, I think, 500 million people with big economy, with big engineering, technological schools. I'm sure that Europe, after some problems, will recover itself for sure. And of course, when we see the split between European Union and Britain on one hand and United States on the other hand, we like, because if they united, they overthrown last democratic elected president of Ukraine, imposed neo-colonial repressive regime to Ukrainian people, and prohibited Russian language, started political repression against people in Ukraine who believe that Russia and Ukraine should be friendly. They started political repression against Orthodox Church.
Okay, but if we go back onto the topic at hand, Sergei, rather than another history lesson, let's keep to the topic at hand. I want your comments on how you are seeing the European response to this.
Is the main reason of the war.
Okay, but that's not the question we're asking, because the main reason for the war has been argued ad infinitum. Now we need to look at what's happening now and what's happening with these discussions going forward. How does Moscow assess the situation within Europe? Is Moscow looking at the divisions within European countries and thinking, aha, we can exploit this, and now we're going to push harder on the negotiations?
Yeah, as we understand, now it's not just split between United States and Europe. It's also split between two big political forces. One of them is globalist, which is more rely on the interests of the big global corporations, and so-called deep state or Euro bureaucracy in European case. It's on the one hand, they want to continue the war. And another say is different populist democratic forces which come to power in United States and which can come to power in Britain and France and Germany, as they want peace. We want to have negotiation with those European politicians who want peace. This is Marine Le Pen, this is Alternative for Germany, this is Farage Nigel, this is Orban, and so on. And these European politicians should take part in peace negotiation. But those who want to destroy the peace, as Boris Johnson destroyed Istanbul peace deal, why they should take part in the peace negotiation? If they enemies of peace, it's our approach. We want to have dialogue and cooperation with everybody who want to have dialogue with us. But those who say that, oh, you're enemies of the world, you should be crushed, and those who told that Russian ladies should be prohibited, Orthodox Church should be prohibited. We're sorry, we don't want to talk with you.
Okay, Bijan, let me
Because
bring
you're
you.
enemy.
Let me bring you back in, Bijan, because in the recent interview that President Trump did in Washington, he was particularly scathing of his European counterparts, accusing European leaders of being weak and of being all talk and no action. Is he right?
Well, you can criticize President Trump for the way he speaks all day long, but you would have a harder time going to the crux of the matter and ask yourself a question. I've lived the reality life, and reality life asks some hard questions. And the question that I asked Tobias, who very kindly and generously took my question, was, what could Europe have done before 2014 to take a position very similar to the position they're taking now? In fact, very reasonably, to stop the escalation. So, was Europe weak? Yes, Europe was weak, not by standards of President Trump alone, but by Europe's own standards, as proven by the stance today by the distinguished minister. So I would say, yes, it is wise of you, Tobias, to accept shared responsibility by not acting. But, we're all subject to that. We cannot look back and rewrite history. What happened, happened. That's why I'll say, let's all take responsibility for what we've done, what we've said. Don't call President Trump naive when you don't like his ideas that actually match your own. You call him what it is. He is tough, he's rough, he exercises all the power the President of the United States has in every which way. And guess what? That's exactly like what President Putin does. He says, look, I don't have to be popular to you. I have to be popular to my people. And as long as he's popular to his people, he will do whatever. And that's precisely what makes Europe, not just Europe, the world, be concerned. What security guarantee? I would say Russia knows that they cannot continue this. I'll answer the question myself. Russia would have fatigue. Look at the debt. Look at the wounded. It's not going to happen. The oligarchs are not going to sell it for it. You and I both know exactly how things work. The military, the oligarch, the executive branch, all tied up together. For Europe, ask for low concessions. Don't go head to head with President Trump. You're not going to win. Look at his record. You cannot win. This is not something you can win. Europe should ask for, concessions that are low cost. It's okay. Just go along. 28 points, reduced to 20 points, showing definitely goodwill. There is some goodwill that needs to come from Europe now. I would say Russia, I don't know if what President Trump says about Russia would be okay with it, exactly what that means, or when he says, look, your analysts, your advisors, President Zelenskyy, are okay with our points, and you need to read them. I don't know if he's actually stating the facts or is the way he talks. What I do know is Europe and Ukraine need to take what they can to end the war. That is possible. It should be done. And I think it can be done. All it takes is take politics out of it. Takes your preferences for the next year's elections or midterm election or anything out of it. I do smell it, and it should be removed. This is not a game against Trump. This is about it ending a war. That's what I like to see in our discussions.
Okay. That leads me on perfectly to our final section here about US-EU relations and how they go forward with these negotiations, because divisions between the US and Europe appears in some quarters to be widening. We had Germany's leader, Friedrich Merz, saying he's sceptical of the US peace proposal. And in return, the US president, as we've been discussing, called EU leaders weak. There's growing concern amongst the bloc that Washington and Moscow will cut a deal that may not be in Europe or Ukraine's best interest. And it's again the latest example of the Trump administration, what some are criticising, the shunning of allies in favour of traditional adversaries. Tobias, could this be a turning point in US-EU relations? Could it go from traditional allies to a more adversarial position?
Yeah, I think that is the profound question for the moment. I see a 2025 being a confirmation of the demise of our global order. You know, the world is safer when there's a geopolitical anchor, and that anchor has been the United States for a number of decades, backed by countries such as Britain. So nations prepared to lead, to restrain aggressors, to uphold international law, and rally with allies. And since 1945, that mantle has very much belonged to the United States. But Washington's willingness to firstly side with Russia over Ukraine, to trust Moscow's promises and undermine Ukrainian sovereignty, signals something profound. America is stepping back from its global responsibilities. That's what that national security strategy confirms. It's creating a dangerous vacuum, and adversaries will fill it. And America will be weaker for it. I make that very clear, which is why I call Trump naive. As globalization suffers, more countries will align with China. Global economy will then be threatened, and that, I'm afraid, is where we are today. So to see this release of this publication, this national security strategy, it makes it official. America is embarking on a seismic ideological shift in global engagement, becoming more isolationist. And America, this is our closest security ally that we're talking about. It deeply concerns us that we're now left alone with other nations, like-minded nations, to defend global order.
Sergei, do you think that there is a huge shift? Is the US now considering Russia not as a rival, as maybe an ally? Is this an opportunity for these two great powers to work together and not against each other?
Yes, and this new strategic security of national, I forgot the specific name of this, new strategy, national strategy of United States will be regarded very positively in Russia, because Trump really say we want to stop this war in Ukraine, and because some more discussion between Europe and the United States, it's also positive for Russia. And they see that Russia is more opportunity, but not a rival. I think it's very much applaud. I think you know that Americans, they are champions of the Western world. Americans first who made democracy, in fact, in the Western world much more before Europeans. Americans are those who come to the religious freedom much more early compared with Europeans. And Americans now try to save democracy, because from my point of view, now most of the European governments, they are not quite democratic already. But Americans try to recover it. And Americans, they are less ideologized and more idealistic, but at the same time realistic. That's why when Americans understood we cannot crush Russia. So let's start talking and finding compromise with them. But Europeans stay to be in the old time after the collapse of Soviet Union and after the finishing Cold War. The Europeans still believe that Russia is a loser. That's why we can defeat Russia. No. Take your Americans as example. Please go to the table for negotiation how we can stop this awful war in Ukraine and how we can build new security of Europe. Stop making Russia as your enemy.
Okay, yeah, so I was going to say, Tobias, I can see you want to jump in there. Go ahead. We're almost out of time, so I'll let you have a say, and then we'll give Bijan a word.
First, it's astonishing hearing our Russian friends speak of democracy when there are not free and fair elections in Russia, that Putin has changed the constitution in order to stay in power. And let me make it really, really clear, sir, that there is no objective in Europe to crush Russia. Please let's use that language. What we want to do is stand up to Russian aggression. If Russia was peaceful, wants to engage economically and security-wise, then it will be an open door. But until that moment
Europe
happens,
Europe has
then I'm
a
afraid
role.
Russia
Europe has
is
a role,
seen
Tobias.
as an adversary.
You
Bijan?
complain about
if you
world order.
don't regard Russia as
Sir-
an enemy,
Let me
please
finish. Let me
say
finish.
Russian
Let me finish.
language should be official governmental language in Ukraine. Second, official government Ukraine. Please say that political repression against Orthodox Church should be stopped in Ukraine. Please
Okay.
say that sounds
Okay.
political
Thank you, Sergey. We're not going to go back over the reasons for the
No.
war, so I'll
Okay,
just hand it
let me
over to
finish.
Bijan. Go
Let me
ahead,
finish.
Bijan.
Let me finish. First of all, I can hear Tobias loud and clear as he is worried about the changing world order. Well, for a moment, let's not argue against each other. Let's just find out what we can find on the Venn diagram that would bring us closer to this. If we accept, which we did, that prior to 2014, this world order should have acted in such a way to stop the escalation, and you bear shared responsibility, Europe, with President Obama and President Biden policies weak. Without a doubt, this is not my humble opinion. The world has agreed on that. Weak, because you did not do what you could do. Today, I believe you're doing. See, if that was an overtone moment, I think we have another overtone moment here, which we should welcome. And that is to realize that maybe the world order does need to be adjusted. The old organizations are not effective. And if you want to criticize President Trump, you could do that all day long. But look at his record. Look at the way Europe has acted. I think the Chancellor Merkel is rethinking their policies in Germany about strengthening Europe's defenses. I believe Europe is thinking about that. I believe the Belgian Prime Minister has a point in saying, look, if you want to put $183 billion into this, push for corruption reforms. Push for that. If Russia wants to say, okay, I will work on this, also agree on making the system more reliable, we cannot have. See, everybody has something to give up safely to come to the end of this war. And that's what I mean by a shift, a sudden shift. It's okay. Sometimes these overtone moments are necessary in politics and diplomacy to end wars.
Tobias, do you want to jump in there?
I'll come back on that. Or is there time?
Yes, please
Yeah,
do.
I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but there is a seismic ideological shift in what Trump is doing. It's announced, he just gave an interview in America saying that he's going to invest in right-wing parties across Europe unless European countries are more subservient to working with the America First project.
We're trying to end the war and we're worried about politics.
How can you not get into politics when the leader of the free world makes statements like that? It is dangerous and it is wrong. We don't make comments about America and what goes on domestically.
It's all about actions and
You've got a lot of challenges there.
I think Europe doesn't get a high grade in the past years when it comes to the Ukrainian war. I'm sorry, I have to be honest here. And
You made that point.
Europe didn't play right.
Sir, you made that point.
I think it's an important point
many times.
That won't go away. It won't go away.
You can make it again if you like, but we're going around the block here. I'm making it very, very clear that America is dialing back from its interests. We're going to see it reduce its military footprint. So you're saying Europe should have done more. NATO was set up for a transatlantic alliance, which includes if something happens in the Atlantic, the Pacific, or indeed in Europe. That's what it was for. Please let me finish. Okay? So when America says we're not having anything to do with you anymore, that's a reality check. We will handle it. But it's not the American way, and it isn't in the spirit of why NATO and the United Nations and all these other organizations, which America is also dialing back from, were created in the first place.
Bijan?
No, I agree with a lot of things that Tobias and Sergey are putting forward. I don't agree with all of the things they say because I have 2 points. My beef is with this. depoliticize the discussion on ending the Ukraine war. Don't bring all these other side issues of what Trump said. And I believe there is an opportunity here. There's an opportunity that is real. It requires cleansing of the argument, the goal of ending the war, of all these politics.
But if
of all
President
these
Trump is the one making these political statements, how can you then say we need to depoliticize the negotiations? Because President Trump is saying them too.
Don't take every banter as policy. That is not the case.
But he's still saying
That's not leadership. That isn't leadership that we have to dissect.
Don't react to it.
Yeah, it's not leadership if we have to dissect what the American president says.
That has not happened yet. You're reacting to what Trump says. React to what is at the table. React to ending war with strategies that are practical. We all know what works. Let's take what works and not the
this
ideal.
is appeasement. This is Chamberlain talk. This is you're talking like Chamberlain.
Temporarily, tactically, like do it. That's what I would say. If
you're talking like Chamberlain. End the war
temporarily for the essential.
Tobias, quick word.
And as I say, that's exactly what Chamberlain would say in 1938. End the war, sign a deal. Let's hope it all works out and let's go home, not realizing that war is coming to us.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes left before I lose you. Sergei, I want to go to you. Sergei, very, very briefly, will this war end before 2026 or in 2026? Are we at the end of this war?
Yes, it will. This war will be over in 2026, and this war will be stopped after Russia will take a real big city, and after Ukrainian army appear to be in the big military crisis.
Okay, all right, Bijan, will this war end before 2026 or in 2026? Are we at the end?
It will end. The war will end because it makes sense for it to end. And no, it would not be peace in our times. Chamberlain's famous. No, it will not be. People are aware. They know. I think Europe knows what they can give up. Low-cost concessions. I think Russia knows what they can give up. Low-cost concessions. I think professionals, leaders will come to that agreement because it makes sense.
Okay.
I hear everyone wanting to end the war.
Tobias, is it going to end by 2026, in 2026?
No, it won't. It's going to progressively escalate in the grey zone area, and Europe itself will be in a deeper form of conflict in the next 5 years.
Gentlemen, I wish we had more time, but we're going to have to leave it there. I appreciate all of your views. Bijan Kyiv, businessman and former US government official.
Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Worked with various administrations, including President Trump. Sergei Markov, thank you for being with us, Director of the Institute of Political Studies. And of course, Tobias Ellwood, former British Defence Minister and past head of the UK Parliament's Defence Select Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for being on Counterpoints. And thank you for tuning into this episode of Counterpoints. Be sure to catch us on YouTube, Al Arabiya English, and across X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.